This is the first of the 4 or 5 different screencasts about the process analysis and performance analysis part of the workshop 2. It's part of the productivity program. So we're going to look at first about process analysis in terms of a causal framework. We're going to look at a few different ones to help you frame your analysis of your different metrics that you've chosen. So what we're bothered about is the business processes that produce those metrics that we looked at in the performance pyramid and your priorities. Is what are the things that produce the outcomes that you see? So people talk about different things about, you know, getting to the heart of what's going on, finding a explanation, what might be happening, and finding what we call the key determinants. So what are the key inputs that cause that to be as it is. It's not a precise model, it's a reasonable explanation. So we're particularly bothered about tracking back and saying, can we identify what are the inputs that cause the outcomes? So for example, if you're measuring OEE, what are the things that go into producing outcomes? That might be the speed of the machine, it might be the downtime, etc. You've also got different ways of thinking about it. So you can think about categories, so maybe different products, different markets, different customers, to help you think about why there is variation in the outcome. Another thing is about incidents, so other things that occur that you can capture when you're looking at your outcomes that are maybe one-off or infrequent things, which are different than the things that occur all the time. So it's about trying to start to unpick why that box produces the outcomes it does. So there's a number of different perspectives about how you go about kind of getting inside that box. So first of all, you could decide that it's all complicated and that different things together cause the outcome. So if you look at on the top left-hand diagram, that's what we call a reality tree, where it's like if X happens, then Y happens, and then Z happens. That's one perspective. The other perspective you can take is, well, you can say, oh, actually, that there are 1 or 2 or maybe 3 or 4 key things, key inputs that affect my output, and everything else is just noise. So what you're looking for is the signal within the noise of inputs. You're trying to find what we call the critical inputs. Sometimes people call them critical X's. So there's no one right perspective, and it might be that you take a mixture of those different approaches to try and identify a causal framework to help you think about analysing both the output and the input. So the first of these is quite simple. It's called an affinity diagram. So that's where you think about what are those inputs that cause the output, and you group them together. People usually do this on post-it notes because it's quite a good way of kind of like of brainstorming that activity. And once you've got them on the wall, you can start to group them into different categories. So there are categories that people use, like machines, people, methods, procedures, incidents. But you can make your own, and depending on what emerges from that conversation in your particular concept. And then you can start to label what those things might be. And that is a very simple causal framework. You can take that a step further, and you can think about using a fishbone diagram or an Ishikawa diagram to identify what your outcome is or your problem. But in this context, we're talking about what the outcome is of that metric. And then you can group them so that the causes are the kind of the bones that align to the spine of the fishbone, and they're all grouped together to deliver that particular outcome. So you can kind of categorize them. So it's a bit like affinity diagram, but you're being a bit more definitive about where it's heading in terms of doing that. You can also take that a step further, and you can think about moving back from the immediate cause back to what we call the root cause. So this example here, you might have some late orders. If you track back as to what's causing that, it might be something that's quite far removed from your initial cause, but it's actually the root of your issue. So it makes you think about, really, I'd want to measure or investigate the root cause rather than the immediate cause. Sometimes you can't do that, so even if you only go back a few steps, a few whys, then that helps you do some more analysis. It helps you delve a bit deeper. And obviously it's called 5 whys because you ask 5 whys 5 times, but you could ask it 6 times or 3 times. It doesn't. It's just an indicative that it's not that simple. Usually you have to ask a few times why something is the way it is. One that is slightly more complicated than fishbone diagrams, and if you like, it's like a fishbone diagram but standing on its tail, is that you have the outcome at the top and then you try and work down what the different causes are. And what's different about it is that you try and group causes together. So sometimes the thing will not happen unless you've got 2 causes that occur together, or maybe 3, or maybe 4, and that, a bit like the 5 whys, you can delve deeper down to kind of look at what are the multiple root causes of things occurring. So it allows you to get more complexity into your causal framework, and it might mean then that you decide to analyse how when things occur together, depending on what you might do. Now, one thing to bear in mind as you go through this is that this is at this stage it's professional opinion. Yeah, it's not validated by data, but it's a start in terms of thinking about what causes what. The last one in the family of causal frameworks is what we call a cause and effect matrix, and that's where you try and be a bit more numerical about the impact of different inputs on the outputs. So you take your black box, wherever it might be, and you think about what the outcomes are. And normally it's quite simple in this case because we've probably just got one outcome. So your one outcome might be, let's say, for example, the OTIF, or the elapsed time from works order release to shipment. So you've got one outcome and you're trying to find all the different inputs into that outcome. So you list them, brainstorm them all, and you put them in a matrix, and then you go through and score them so that you say, well, is it a strong relationship, you score it a 9. If it's a weak relationship, you score it a 3, and if it's barely a relationship, you score it a 1, or you score it a 0. If you do that enough times, then you can find out, it's a screening process, what are the top 5 inputs that you should investigate. So again, it's another causal framework.